It's curious how silence changes its texture when you awaken. Before, silence was only the pause between conversations, the space between one laugh and the next. After something inside you awakens, it becomes almost a living presence. You begin to feel the weight of words spoken only to fill the void, and you discover that this emptiness was never the enemy. It was the only place where something true could be born. This is why, slowly, you begin to drift away. Not out of arrogance, not because you think you're above anyone, but because certain conversations simply no longer fit inside your chest. It's as if you were a tree that suddenly outgrew the pot where it was planted. The pot isn't bad, it's just too small now. And the others, accustomed to your old size, keep watering the same space, talking about the same things, expecting the same answers. But you no longer fit there. Your roots start cracking the ceramic. You try to shrink yourself, try to adjust, but the discomfort grows. And the more you try to maintain the old shape, the more you realize that the only way out is to break, not out of choice, but out of the need to breathe. Maybe you've noticed that in gatherings with old friends, something has changed and you can't pretend it hasn't. The laughter sounds rehearsed. The topics revolve around the same insecurities, the very ones that once felt normal but now sound like static. And it's not because you're better, it's because you see differently. It's like watching a movie you already know the ending to, and suddenly realizing you can't fake surprise anymore. It's uncomfortable, but necessary. Because awakening doesn't make you more enlightened, it makes you more sensitive to what no longer resonates. Deep down, there's grief in this, a silent mourning for every version of yourself that once fit in those places. You realize you didn't lose friends, you lost context. And each farewell, even unspoken, is a part of you dissolving. People remain the same, but you are no longer the person who used to sit at that table, and that changes everything. They still see you with old eyes, but you no longer recognize yourself in the stories they tell about you, and there is no way to explain this without sounding strange. So you choose silence not as an escape, but as respect for what has already passed. Awakening, after all, isn't about gaining something new, but about losing what was false, and losing hurts, even when it's liberation. Because the ego loves company, while the soul prefers truth. Little by little, you realize that being awake is walking on ground where few dare to step, not because it's sacred, but because it requires a kind of solitude that most people aren't willing to face. And it's there, in the middle of that echoing emptiness, that you begin to understand that maybe solitude isn't punishment but the first form of freedom. You see, no one wakes up one day and decides to lose friends. It happens like the tide receding from the shore, slow, subtle, but inevitable. First, it's a small absence, an invitation you avoid, a message you don't reply to. Then, before you realize it, there's already a distance between you, and that distance has the exact size of what you can no longer pretend. Because it becomes impossible to keep participating in a reality that no longer makes sense once you've seen behind the curtain of the play. It's like an actor who wakes up in the middle of the scene and realizes the stage is made of cardboard. He remains there, surrounded by other actors who take the script seriously, shouting their lines and crying their sorrows, but he can't believe in it the same way anymore, and there's no way to explain this to them. Any attempt sounds like arrogance, as if he were thinking he's special. But it's not about that. It's not about superiority, it's about perception. You simply began to see the seams, the lights, the constructed scenery. And when that happens, no matter how much you love the cast, you can't act with the same conviction. Social life, in that sense, is a collective performance. Everyone silently agrees to pretend that what seems important, success, status, opinions, truly is. But when the awakened eye sees through it, everything loses its shine. The problem is that, for others, you are the one who changed. And in a way, that's true. Your frequency shifted, your gaze deepened, your presence softened. Superficial conversations start to exhaust you. Repeated complaints sound like scratched records. Forced laughter hurts. And it's not disdain, it's saturation. It's like trying to breathe underwater after your body has already learned the taste of air. Maybe you've noticed you speak less and observe more. Before, you wanted to participate, contribute, be heard. Now, there's a silence within you that watches everything with tenderness but without the impulse to interfere. This confuses people. They call you distant, different, strange. And in fact, there is a difference. You're no longer trying to fit in. What used to move you was the fear of being alone. What moves you now is the peace of not having to force yourself. You realize that real love isn't about maintaining physical presence, but about not lying energetically. Staying where you no longer resonate is a subtle form of betrayal. And when you finally accept this, something reorganizes inside you. Solitude stops being absence and becomes space. Places that once bored you now offer rest. People who call you weird may never know that your silence is a form of love, the kind that doesn't try to change anyone, and you learn to walk between worlds, present in the old one but rooted in the new. Until one day, without guilt, you simply leave, and those who truly loved you don't lose you, they just recognize you differently. In truth, every friendship is a mirror, and awakening, quietly, changes the reflection. Before, you saw yourself in the people around you, you shared the same pains, the same ambitions, the same jokes that felt like they belonged to you. Afterward, it's as if the glass fogged over. The same conversations that once excited you now sound like echoes from a place you no longer belong to. Not because you're better, but because something in you stopped reacting the same way. The old emotional chemistry simply dissolved, and what once united you now feels like a language you forgot how to speak. Think of a radio shifting frequencies. The music continues playing on the other stations, but you can't hear it anymore. That's what happens when consciousness changes vibration. The old sounds become distant noise. And no matter how hard you try to tune yourself back to the previous signal, something won't let you. There's an uncomfortable lucidity that doesn't switch off. You can't unsee what you've seen. And what you saw was too simple to explain. You realize that most conversations aren't communication, they're defense, that most advice isn't wisdom, it's fear disguised as guidance. That love, often, isn't surrender, it's a bargain for safety. This creates an invisible gap between you and the world. You still love people, but you no longer seek them to feel complete, and that, paradoxically, pushes them away. Because most relationships are held together by the unspoken agreement of mutual need. I need you to need me. When one side stops needing, the game falls apart. And those who live from emotional lack interpret your detachment as coldness. But it's not coldness, it's freedom. It's like a bird suddenly opening its wings and realizing the sky was always open, while the others are still debating the size of the cage. Maybe you felt this in small gestures. The friend who gets irritated because you no longer share the same dramas. The relative who insists on bringing you back to reality. The person who smirks and says, "You seem different." They're right, you are different. But what they don't know is how much it cost you to become that way, how much pain you had to endure to no longer react to the same provocations, how much of yourself had to die so you could smile again without pretending. The price of authenticity is misunderstanding, and strangely, it's also its greatest gift. In the end, you understand that it's not the world rejecting you, it's your vibration shifting away from what no longer reflects who you are. Old relationships dissolve because they were built on versions of you that no longer exist. And there's nothing wrong with that. Every loss is an invitation. When old bonds break, something in you becomes available for what is true, and this new kind of connection doesn't happen by coincidence, it happens by resonance. You don't look for it, you attract it. Because those who learn to be alone finally stop seeking companionship and begin to share presence. Let me explain. Awakening is not a serene sunset, it's an inner fire. It burns away the illusions you once clung to and illuminates things you would rather have never seen. That's why the distancing doesn't happen through rational choice, but through vibrational incompatibility. When you begin to see clearly, the social world, that stage where everyone tries to appear happy, reveals itself as full of artifice. And the most curious part is that you were once part of that performance too. You laughed at the same jokes, pretended the same enthusiasms, chased the same victories that now seem so small. But when consciousness expands, those masks fall off on their own, and the only sound left is the silence of truth. This silence, in fact, is the great dividing line. It isn't the silence of someone who has nothing to say, it's the silence of someone who has realized that most words exist only to keep fear at a distance. People talk because they're terrified of the void, and when you learn to rest in the void, you become uncomfortable for those who still need it filled. It's as if your presence exposes the noise they make to avoid hearing themselves. It isn't judgment, it's energy. Your silence becomes a mirror, and not everyone is ready to see their reflection in it. Maybe you've noticed how the atmosphere changes in certain groups when you arrive. Conversations become more cautious. Laughter loses its naturalness. It's nothing personal. The collective unconscious senses when someone has stopped playing the same game. People protect themselves from anyone who is no longer inside the narrative. And how could you explain to someone that you're no longer trying to win because you've realized the game was the trap all along? You can't. So you stay quiet, let the pieces move on their own, and when no one notices, you slip out through the side of the board. It's uncomfortable, but necessary, because awakening, contrary to what many imagine, doesn't make you more enlightened, it makes you more naked. And spiritual nakedness is embarrassing in a world of costumes. You feel everything more intensely: love and absence, joy and boredom, laughter and indifference. Some days you wish you could go back to being ignorant, just to fit into simple conversations again. But it's too late. You can't unsee what you've seen, nor unlearn what you've learned. The path back has vanished, and the only place left is the present, raw, vibrant, unfiltered. And in this present, something changes in the way you relate. You stop looking for those who understand you and begin to honor those who feel you. You no longer need to explain, justify, or convince, because truth, once mature, no longer needs to be spoken, it simply reveals itself. The friends who remain aren't the ones who understand you intellectually, but the ones who can sit with your silence without trying to fill it. And they are few, rare, almost sacred. Because only those who have faced their own emptiness can walk beside someone who is at peace with theirs. It's curious how solitude changes its face when you stop resisting it. At first, it feels like punishment. You miss someone who understands you, deep conversations, the kind of gaze that recognizes who you've become. But over time, you realize solitude isn't punishing you, it's cleansing you. It removes distractions, noise, old identities, and gradually, that emptiness that once frightened you begins to smell like freedom. Silence becomes shelter, time slows down, and the simple act of breathing becomes a kind of invisible prayer. Social life, once